Tucker, thank you so much. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney, broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Invest 2025 conference down here in Lower Manhattan. Well, last night, during President Trump's address to the joint session of Congress, he acknowledged that there may be, quote, an adjustment period as his tariffs take effect, but defended his push to remake the U.S. economy and declared momentum is back. Let's take a listen.
If you don't make your product in America, however, under the Trump administration, you will pay a tariff, and in some cases, a rather large one. Countless other nations charge us tremendously higher tariffs than we charge them. April 2nd, reciprocal tariffs kick in. The tariffs will go on agricultural product coming into America, and our farmers starting on April 2nd. It may be a little bit of an adjustment period. I have also imposed a 25% tariff on foreign aluminum, copper, lumber, and steel. Tariffs are about making America rich again and making America great again, and it's happening, and it will happen rather quickly. There'll be a little disturbance, but we're okay with that.
All right, that was President Trump addressing a joint session of Congress last night. Let's go right to Nathan Dean, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Policy Analyst. Nathan, what'd you take away from the speech last night?
Yeah, so on the tariff front, I think the message to what we're telling to our clients is that, look, this trade war is going to be around for a fairly long time. You know, the question is, what is the scope and the size of these tariffs? You know, obviously we have this announcement later today that we could see some scaling back of the Canada-Mexico tariffs, probably in the automobile industry. You know, President Trump mentioned that he spoke with the big three automakers yesterday. But, you know, this April 2nd reciprocal tariff idea, it's certainly something investors need to prepare for because it is something that President Trump wants to do. And we often get the question of what would President Trump need in response to back away from some of these tariffs? And I think it's really two things. One, he likes to look at the stock market. He likes to see what happens in terms of, you know, the Dow Jones and the S&P and so forth. But also it comes to prices and prices of consumers. You know, we saw Best Buy and Target announce that we're going to have some price increases this weekend. If we get to a situation where 2-3 months from now, there's some sticker shock amongst the consumer base, then I think you could see potentially some of this rolled back. But tariffs are going to be here for a while.
So do you feel like we do have a Trump put then? Is that what we've kind of seen over the last 12 hours?
You know, I think the idea of the strategy here is that President Trump comes with almost like a shock and awe. I mean, this is what they coined the shock and awe strategy for the executive orders, and I think it's very similar for the tariff argument. President Trump comes out and says 25%, you know, tariffs on Canada and Mexico. You know, Canada and Mexico negotiates over border security and fentanyl, those to get delayed 30 days. It's part of his mantra to negotiate. But eventually he moves forward and says, look, I'm going to do it. He did it. But again, the negotiation always can take place. And, you know, I think the number one goal here for President Trump is to put these tariffs in place. But the number two goal is to do it in a way that there's no sticker shock for the American consumer. You know, and so if automobiles in particular, if Ford and GM went to the White House and said, look, we're going to raise prices on a Ford Focus 15, 25, 30% as a result of this, you know, President Trump, I think, is going to respond because he understands that it was the high prices and inflation which drove a lot of voters to him in the election. And that's the last thing he wants to do. But, you know, as I think many economists are saying with tariffs, you know, that could be a byproduct of what's happening here. So I think he's going to remain flexible in the interim.
And also, Nathan, President Trump calls for an end to the $52 billion CHIPS Act subsidy program. What was the feedback on that one?
Yeah, so this was actually somewhat of a surprise. I would actually call this my biggest surprise of the address last night because, you know, the $52 billion CHIPS Act that was passed was bipartisan in nature. It actually got quite a bit of votes in the Senate, both in the Republican and the House. Republican and Democrat. But as President Trump mentioned that last night, if you looked at House Speaker Mike Johnson's reaction, it was somewhat lukewarm. I actually thought at the time potentially this was a surprise and he didn't know this was coming. But what we're telling our clients is this, is that when it comes to the CHIPS Act, there is still bipartisan support for this bill, $52 billion in subsidies that has already brought in about $400 billion in investments. There is bipartisan support. And if you were to try and do this via reconciliation, meaning this tax package, it's just going to make the tax package even harder to pass. So I think you may see some headline risk on this and certainly some funding freezing potentially risks. But I think there's a low chance of this being overturned by Congress in the next 12 months.
It does feel like reciprocal tariffs, though, are definitely on the table for April 2nd. These weeks move real fast. How are you telling clients to think about this reciprocal tariff risk?
So, I would start with the base case scenario, the ultimate scenario that it's just a 100% fruition tariff, reciprocal, you tax us, we tax you type of scenario. But then you have to figure out, okay, well, President Trump is not going to want to harm certain industries. For example, we've always been pretty cognizant or looking at the potash, Canada-U.S. relationship just because it's so key to fertilizers. President Trump said this in his speech last night in terms of farmers. We're going to protect you. And so I think then you just start playing what-if scenarios of how does this actually transplant down to individual companies, individual countries. And so it's kind of challenging here because there's so many different countries that have a relationship with the United States. But ultimately, you have to prepare for the idea that they tax us, we tax you, is what's going to happen on April 2nd. And then from there on, it actually gets dialed down. Steve Mnuchin said at the event today at Bloomberg Invest, former Treasury Secretary, said, I like the idea of a 10% universal tariff across the globe. That could make its way into the White House. But right now, you have to take what President Trump is saying as word and prepare for that.
So, Nathan, we heard yesterday President Trudeau of Canada hitting back pretty forcefully on behalf of Canada. We have not heard from the president of Mexico. We're supposed to hear from her this weekend. What do you expect from Mexico?
So I think the president of Mexico is taking a different approach, obviously, to Prime Minister Trudeau, and the fact that, Mexico did not have immediate reaction to that. And as a result, we didn't see President Trump talking about the president of Mexico like he was talking about, quote, what he would say, Governor Trudeau of the 51st state of the United States. So you didn't see that type of relationship with Mexico and the United States. However, what we've seen from Bloomberg News' reporting in Mexico City is that Mexico is coming up with an idea or is coming up with a response to this. But because the Mexican economy is so key on the United States trade relationship, I think you're going to continue to see more of carrots being thrown between the two as opposed to, this is what our reciprocal tariff or reciprocal actions. So I think the president of Mexico is going to try and have additional negotiations here with the folks here in Washington. Ultimately, I do think Mexico, if the situation doesn't change, will come back with a tariff some kind. But I think Mexico is going to take this more wait-and-see approach, very similar to what we've seen coming out of China, where, there's some reaction, but not like we saw from Canada, at least in the area of public perception.
All right, Nathan, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. I probably pulled an all-nighter on this one. Nathan
Yes.
Dean, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Policy Analyst, joining us.